In Past Paradise, we reveal Hollywood's hidden secrets. We explore the interesting life of Jamie Lee Curtis, a versatile actress and industry veteran. Jamie, daughter of Tony Curtis, inherited complicated and frequently unscrupulous behaviors, not riches. Jamie's path of endurance and self-discovery through her father's stormy relationships and infamous lifestyle is inspiring. Join us as we unravel Hollywood's golden period and its shadows to discover how Jamie Lee Curtis found her way. Expect an interesting, eye-opening encounter as we unravel a riveting, illuminating narrative. Growing up on an empty stomach. A common misconception is that affluent movie actors have always been affluent. For Tony Curtis, however, this couldn't be farther from the reality. Bernard Schwartz was the real Tony Curtis, as the film industry came to know and adore him, born in 1925. He grew up in Manhattan, sharing a modest room with his family behind his father's tailor business. The family often lacked the money for food, in addition to sharing a tiny apartment. Their financial circumstances were so dire at one time that Tony and his siblings were placed in an orphanage for a month. Although we would all want to think that the Schwartz family's situation has only gotten better, this isn't the case. Tragedy seemed to follow Tony. Tony's life had not been easy from the day he was born. Even though his family didn't have enough money for meals, they did have each other. Regretfully, he soon lost his family's stability as well. Tony lost his brother when a vehicle ran over him when he was only 12 years old. Tony was a young child attempting to process such a significant loss, but the blows kept coming. He would learn later that mental illness was inherited. He was about to lose 2 more of his dear family members on top of the one he had already lost. Mental illness stole his family. Although a person's house should be their secure haven, Curtis felt uncomfortable there. He saw a change in his mother's attitude as the years passed. Tony remembered, "Mom beat me up and was very aggressive and antagonistic when I was a kid." Tony remembered several instances in which his mother hit him without really knowing why. His mother was eventually given a schizophrenia diagnosis. Tragic events occurred once again as the family recovered and his mother received the assistance she needed. Tony's sibling required institutionalization since he had inherited his mother's mental disorder. He was saved from a different life. Growing up in Manhattan has its own set of challenges. You have one difficult youngster when you combine it with the tragedy that shadowed the Schwartzes every step of the way. Tony grew up knowing how to survive on the streets. He joined a neighborhood gang as a youngster, and their primary offenses were skipping school and small-time thievery from the dime shop. When Curtis was 11, a kind neighbor sent him to a Boy Scout camp, sparing him from what he believed would have been a life of criminality. He was able to release his energies and relax there. Tony used to get into risky street fights because of his previous conduct, but he was wise enough to defend his best feature, his attractive face. He was aware of his excellent looks as a teenager. It was profitable. Saying goodbye to Bernard Schwartz. Tony obtained a job driving a truck to help put food on the table. However, he knew that greater things were ahead for him and that this wasn't it for him. He then enrolled in acting courses. When a talent agency saw Tony and made contact with him, the gloomy cloud hanging over his life temporarily appeared to dissipate. It was the niece of David O. Selznick, not some talent agency. Tony renamed himself, relocated to Hollywood, and landed a job at Universal Studios. In addition to taking tiny parts in a few movies, he began his acting career with fencing and riding courses. Although Curtis was ecstatic, he was after some cash and female attention. He could never have predicted how successful he would become. Tony was nothing like they had seen before. Women were completely enamored with Tony Curtis when he appeared on the screen. You may wonder why. Our best judgment is that Tony's uniqueness set him apart from other leading males in Hollywood. He was blue-eyed and had large lips to start. He also introduced a new kind of feminine masculine beauty to the profession by paying close attention to his looks and plucking his eyebrows. In addition to his stunning appearance, Tony introduced a classic ducktail hairdo to the big screen. Tony made several surprising decisions over his career, but his hairdo was never one of them. Elvis Presley was so influenced by it that he included it in his characteristic look. A legendary love story. Tony appeared in the romantic comedy Some Like It Hot with Marilyn Monroe in 1959. Many people were unaware that Tony claimed the two had previously dated in 1949. Tony recalls spending a lot of joyful times on the beach with the celebrity, including grilling and other activities. Regretfully, the couple's joyful recollections weren't around for very long. Even though their romance ended, their tale persisted for a considerable time. The pair experienced a wide range of emotions together, most of which were negative. Curtis had already drawn the attention of another movie diva at this point. Janet Leigh was hard to miss. Tony was relatively new to film, but his work and life flourished. Though he could never have predicted that he would reach this position, he always knew he would leave New York. Janet Leigh was a very gorgeous and brilliant celebrity in Hollywood. Curtis never thought she would notice him, even though she was difficult to ignore. Fans were ecstatic when the two began dating. They soon established themselves as Hollywood's it pair and were eager to advance in their union. There was a barrier preventing Tony and Janet from getting married. Their only option was to elope. Tony and Janet were much in love and wanted to formalize their union via marriage. But Curtis had a contract with Universal International, and they weren't certain about getting married. They were, but not to Janet Leigh, that is. Universal International wanted Tony to wed co-star Piper Laurie because they understood Tony's heartthrob image's appeal. The corporation spent 3 days attempting to talk Tony out of marrying Janet because they believed that he and Piper would be the next big thing in Hollywood. They even threatened to send him back to his impoverished existence in New York in an attempt to thwart the wedding. They forgot Curtis learned never to back down from a battle while living in New York. As a result, Janet and Curtis fled and were married in Connecticut. Tony found his sweet spot. The newlyweds went back to Hollywood to confront their destiny after eloping, but their marriage had the exact opposite effect on their career as it did on it. The audience felt that Leigh and Curtis improved each other when they worked together. Around this time, Curtis decided to give comedy a go. He had struck cinematic gold, his sweet spot. His comedy was quite well liked, but eventually people began laughing at him instead of with him. Curtis portrayed Kazma Baba in the 1952 motion picture Son of Ali Baba. Tony's accent slipped during one of his lines, leaving everyone in stitches. The crowd made fun of Curtis without intending to hurt him when he stated Yonda and Fada instead of Yonder lies the castle of my father. Sadly, Curtis didn't see it that way. His family grew twofold. Following a few years of marriage, Tony and Janet's little family expanded swiftly. Instead of having just one kid, they gave birth to 2 almost simultaneous children. Their family quickly expanded from 2 to 4 members, a double increase. June 1956 saw the birth of Kelly Curtis, and November 1958 saw the birth of Jamie Lee, her sister. Tony's life completely transformed over the years, and he became a father and a spouse. Tony had been excellent in everything he had done up to this point. Sadly, fatherhood was not one of those things. The film that changed his career. Curtis secured a leading part in Some Like It Hot shortly after the birth of his second daughter, a role he would go on to become well known for. Curtis portrayed Josephine, a transvestite, in this 1959 movie. The movie was such a hit that nobody in the audience realized how much turmoil was going on behind the scenes. Marilyn Monroe struggled with several personal problems throughout the production and often refused to leave her trailer. When she did, she would often cry uncontrollably before filming a scene. Although there were rumors of tension between her and Tony on set, he later denied them all and said that his well-known comment that kissing her was like kissing Hitler was taken out of context. He claimed that the comment was sarcastic and said, "It's like kissing Hitler. What are you doing asking me such a stupid question?" in response to being asked the same question repeatedly. Jealousy is an ugly emotion. Tony was a well-known player, so everyone was surprised when he married Janet. Perhaps she altered him? Sadly, it wasn't the situation. Tony continued to cheat despite having exchanged vows and wearing a wedding band. Curtis spent too much time at the Playboy Mansion while married to one of the most gorgeous ladies Hollywood had ever seen. In addition, he was said to have had romantic involvements with Natalie Wood, and even acknowledged his feelings for Gloria DeHaven, his co-star. Ironically, Curtis believed his wife was unfaithful to him because she was jealous. He would often give her many calls to inquire about her whereabouts and companionship. He was certain at one time that Lee was seeing singer and close friend Frank Sinatra. Janet had taken her wedding vows seriously, even if he hadn't. At least, temporarily, that is. A scene full of controversy and drama. Curtis immersed himself in his career and appeared in the epic 1960 classic Spartacus, despite his marriage imploding. But as with most things with Curtis, controversy quickly ensued. Curtis and Laurence Olivier filmed a very contentious sequence for the movie. There was obvious sexual chemistry and mutual interest in the moment when these two were lathering each other. Since censors would almost delete the sequence regardless, the producers decided not to shoot it. Tony was furious about this choice, and he battled to have the incident recorded. The studio agreed to shoot the sequence to maintain peace. The performers were kept in the dark because they didn't use sound. After all, it wouldn't be utilized. But Curtis's altercation brought up some concerns over his private life. Was Curtis keeping a secret? Having practiced memorizing his lines, was Curtis only battling for a contentious moment, or was he concealing something personal? Even though Curtis excelled in his two main roles, others questioned whether he had been romantically interested in men. He had, after all, bathed with a different guy in Spartacus and portrayed a cross-dresser in Some Like It Hot. Tony refuted the rumors and charges that he was attracted to guys. Even though he was heterosexual, he said, he loved and embraced his brothers and sisters who weren't. His marriage fell apart. Rather than putting his marriage first, Curtis immersed himself in his job and persisted in accusing his wife of having an affair. After 11 years of marriage in 1962, it seemed that Janet had had enough of his neurotic jealousy. It truly did, after all that insistence that Lee had been skulking about with Sinatra behind his back. Lee and Curtis filed for divorce after realizing their marriage had reached its end. Like most things in his life, Tony could bounce back remarkably. He had no idea that it would damage his reputation. Curtis made questionable choices. It's hardly shocking that Curtis wasted little time finding a new partner since he had been having relationships while still married to Lee. In the year after his divorce, Curtis wed Christine Kaufman. The two got to know each other on the 1962 action movie Taurus Bulba set. Since the two seemed content, why wasn't everyone else? Their 21-year age difference could have played a role. Kaufman was just 17 years old then, and Curtis was 38. Curtis was the other half of the ideal pair when he married Lee. But when he wed a teenager, it simply made everyone uncomfortable. This was the moment when everything began to fall apart around him. The audience stopped laughing. Curtis had established himself in the business by now, and humor was his sweet spot. But with his second marriage, his career suffered. Curtis had lead roles in many comedies throughout the 1960s, but none of them turned out to be successful. The choices he had made in his personal life influenced how the public saw him. He was aware that he had to act swiftly to make a difference. Curtis switched things up. Tony knew his career would end shortly if he didn't take immediate action. Thus, he decided to change course and completely pivot his career. Following a career mostly in comedy, Curtis took on a sinister part in the 1968 movie The Boston Strangler. Critics applauded Curtis for his performance even if they had issues with the film. Tony had turned things around, and things looked better for him professionally. I wish things would remain that way. After 5 years, Tony needed an upgrade. Remarkably, Tony and Kaufman were married for 5 years and had 2 kids. But at this point, it was evident that a happy relationship with Tony Curtis never lasted, and the two parted ways in 1968. Once again, Tony found his second wife quickly, and she was, presumably, as young. Tony wed model and actress Leslie Allen in the same year as his divorce from Kaufman, a few days thereafter. It was almost as if Tony had exchanged Kaufman for a fresh model, equally unsophisticated and 20 years Tony's younger. Curtis broke the law. Kaufman returned to Germany with her children after the breakdown of their marriage. Even though Curtis wasn't a very good parent, he still loved his kids and hated the thought of them moving away from home. Curtis abducted his children from their mother and took them back to the United States to live with him out of desperation to maintain his family unit. Kaufman didn't fight to reclaim her children for whatever reason. That is, until she began to hear gossip about Curtis's new partner. It turns out that Tony was failing miserably to provide his 2 young kids with a kid-friendly atmosphere. Her ex-husband was a drug addict, and his new spouse was a bottle addict. Tony's work and life had turned for the worse from the beginning. Tony had hit rock bottom. When Tony first met and wed Leslie Allen, his new wife, his heroin addiction began. He had gone from being one of Hollywood's most sought-after men to a washed-up actor struggling with a serious drug addiction in a matter of years. His acting possibilities declined along with the turndown in his personal life. When he was consuming drugs, no one wanted to work with him, and the only jobs he could obtain were in low-budget TV movies. After learning about Tony's condition, Kaufman insisted that Tony return their girls to her. Curtis appears to have required losing the kids as a wake-up call to turn his life around. He began by filing for divorce from Allen and making an appointment for therapy at the Betty Ford Treatment Facility. Even though not everyone who enters leaves clean, Curtis gives it his all this time and gives up cold turkey. Another young woman, another marriage. Curtis was fortunate enough to overcome his drug addiction. However, it did not imply that there was no addiction. There was only one left, and that was marriage. Curtis wanted love in his life again now that he was clean, and he found it in actress Andrea Savio. She was much younger than he was, just like in his past marriages. The age difference of 38 years did not stop 21-year-old Savio from being drawn to Tony. That wasn't the most peculiar aspect of their marriage for some reason. When people discovered that Savio had previously portrayed Marilyn Monroe's ex-girlfriend in Bus Stop, their relationship strained. Curtis wasn't feeling the love. Curtis's relationship with Savio was brief in its affection. The marriage breakdown could have begun when Tony's films received little praise from his followers. Seemingly believing his youthful spouse was responsible for it, he decided to initiate divorce proceedings. Curtis appeared to have had enough of young actresses and had moved on to a young lawyer. He was certain that a spouse in a different industry would be a good match for him without considering the possibility that his failed marriages resulted from his behavior. Unfortunately, he couldn't have made a worse mistake. In actuality, his 18-month marriage to Lisa Deutsch was the shortest. He wasn't ashamed to admit what he liked. Curtis had experienced many unsuccessful marriages, and in the majority of them, a pattern began to take shape. There was a much greater age difference between each bride. Curtis never wanted a bride with the same wrinkles, even if he was growing older and had more. He wasn't embarrassed or scared to say he was attracted to younger ladies. About his brides, he even acknowledged his preferences, declaring, "I wouldn't be caught dead with a lady old enough to be my wife." Tragedy struck the Curtis clan. Curtis had 6 kids by the time he was going through his 6th divorce. Even though his family was chaotic, it was nonetheless large and loving. He was devastated to learn of the death of his son, Nicholas Allen. On July 2, 1994, Nicholas lost the battle against heroin addiction in Provincetown. The whole Curtis family was shocked to learn of his death at the age of 23. The actor said that the death of his kid was the most painful event in his life and that it was a terrible thing when a father loses his son. Tony also made comments on his son's departure. He wasn't a good influence on his children. Some individuals were destined to be parents, while others weren't. Regretfully, Curtis was one of those who never felt up to becoming a father. Being a parent and loving your kids is insufficient at some point. You must positively impact their lives and set an example for them. Tony, however, was not like this. In a recent interview, his daughter, the renowned and gifted actress Jamie Lee Curtis, disclosed a family secret. Jamie Lee acknowledged that she had previously exchanged illicit narcotics with her father and that she was also no stranger to drug addiction. Rather than being a good role model for her, he made it possible for his daughter to battle addiction for 10 years. A final attempt at love. In 1998, Tony married Jill Vandenberg, his sixth and last wife. Model Jill represented the largest age difference between Curtis and any of his other brides. Age is only a number, but sometimes it can also be eerie. Given the 46-year age gap between the two, his new bride was half the age of his second daughter, Jamie Lee. Jill had started riding horses when she was a lingerie model. The two developed a deep love for horses and started a haven for animals who had been mistreated and abandoned. Curtis seemed happy and alive, but that didn't mean ardent supporters stopped loving him. A confession that left everyone speechless. Tony starred in Some Like It Hot, one of his first big hits, and the film's production was the subject of a book released in 2009. This book included Curtis's confession, which stunned everyone. He said that he had an affair with co-star Marilyn Monroe during the making of the picture. In the confession, he disclosed 2 reasons why the two had kept it a secret. The first was that Marilyn had become pregnant with his kid, and the second was that they were married. Sadly, she miscarried and was unable to bring the child to term. Regretfully, Curtis didn't just drop one bomb throughout his marriage to Jill. Curtis was in the doghouse. Although his relationship with Marilyn Monroe shocked everyone, it was also partly expected. Considering his standing then, Curtis was expected to perform above average. But Curtis released a bombshell in 2008 that nobody anticipated. He said in an interview that he only ever had one real love. Gloria DeHaven, his former co-star, was the one who was involved. We can't help but believe that most married individuals would have kept that information private. Going back to his roots for his final film. Curtis's last movie appearance was the drama David and Fatima, 2008. We believe he couldn't have chosen a finer movie to round out his acting career. Tony, whose true last name is Schwartz, performed the role of Mr. Schwartz in the movie. Despite his best efforts to get above his impoverished upbringing, he would always identify as a Schwartz. Using his true name felt like the ideal farewell after all this time. It arrived at the ideal moment. He took his final bow. Tragic events struck the Curtis clan once again on September 29, 2010. They mourned the death of their father, Tony Curtis. Tony had a huge heart attack at his home outside Las Vegas, only 2 years after the premiere of his last picture. Sadly, no one was able to rescue the 85-year-old, and he passed away. Like always with Tony, he left a trail of drama in his wake. His children fought for days and months after his death, not even mourning for the loss of their father. His family felt robbed. It should come as no surprise that Curtis was wealthy after devoting years of his life to the motion picture business, wealth he had always pledged to distribute among his many wives and children. However, his former wife, Jill Vandenberg, was the only one who had collected money after his death. The rest of his family was left with nothing, while she made off with $60 million. Just 6 months before he died, Tony amended his will to explicitly state that they were excluded. His kids battled for their part, but their efforts were in vain. Allegra said, "I don't think that was his last wish, even though it's written there. We all know who impacted him, thus I think he was influenced. I don't have to use her name, but their suspect was identified in court documents that her sister Kelly submitted as a result of duress, menace, fraud, or undue influence by Jill Curtis and/or others," the petition states. Jill took control. After Tony passed away, Jill staged an estate and asset auction. She raised over $1 million, which she retained for herself. She put up important objects for sale, such as an Andy Warhol picture that brought in $53,125, Curtis's legendary yachtsman jacket from Some Like It Hot, which brought in $48,000, and a Firebird convertible that brought in $21,250. She didn't even let his relatives know about the deal. Allegra said, "Jill Curtis is the sole winner of this auction." Allegra stated, "She's even selling my dad's letters to Cary Grant, Jerry Lewis, and Picasso. These belong in a museum. It's the dissemination of the estate of Tony Curtis. He deserves better. She did not consult us. This is not what my dad would have wanted." Jill, who has since remarried, sold their ranch in 2019. Tony's will wasn't the only scandal. After the shock of their father's will and the anger subsided, Kim Novak, the actress from Picnic and Vertigo movies, made an astonishing accusation against the late Tony Curtis. Kim claimed that during a party, Curtis spiked her drink. She claimed to have had only one drink before blacking out and waking up in her bed, naked, with no memory of anything happening between the two events. Kim claimed that Curtis was responsible for making this happen. Despite everything, Curtis made history. Even decades after the release of Spartacus, Tony never gave up on getting the controversial scene back into the movie. And after 4 decades, Tony finally won. He re-recorded the audio for his character and had Anthony Hopkins fill in for Olivier. Not only did he finally get what he wanted, but this scene is now a landmark part of LGBTQ+ cinema history. Tony was a legend who made history in the film industry despite his failed marriages and poor life choices.
If you've watched the video till here, that means you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notifications bell icon